Blog Talk Radio.
You are now checked into Lez Talk Books Radio.
Well, good evening, and welcome to Lez Talk Books Radio, a show dedicated to Black lesbian literature every Tuesday evening, hosted by Andrea Allen, myself of BLF Press, and Lauren Cherelle of Resolute Publishing. Today we are talking with the formidable Paula Ashe.
Hello. Hey, how you doing, Paula? If you have any questions or comments, jump into the chat room during the show. You can also call 347-945-7085 during the Q&A. Again, that's 347-945-7085. Or during the week, chat with us via Facebook and Twitter. Just search Lez Talk Books Radio or shoot us an email at leztalkbooksradio@gmail.com.
Okay, Paula, so I have a couple of questions for you about this dark genre fiction. Tell us what it is.
All right.
Is it horror? What is it?
Dark genre fiction is kind of a mix. Basically, if we want to kind of separate things in two big categories, there'll be speculative fiction and then literary fiction. So literary fiction is, for lack of a better phrase, everything that's kind of not speculative fiction, and the reverse is also true. But primarily literary fiction deals with the real world, real-life events. There's no fantasy. There's no magic. There's really not much in the way of supernatural, although, of course, those borders can be fluid and things can go back and forth. And then under the big category of speculative fiction, dark genre fiction is basically anything that includes horror but can also include some subgenres like dark fantasy, dark science fiction, kind of supernatural, paranormal, romance kind of also fits into that category. So basically any type of speculative fiction that has somewhat of a darker edge to it, and that darker edge usually comes out in the form of having some kind of horrific or frightening element to it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a follow-up for you. Are there any or are there many Black lesbian writers doing this kind of work? I know you are, and I think I've maybe heard of a couple other folks doing this kind of stuff, but who do you know?
That is a fantastic question. I've been thinking about that since we started planning for this interview. And I hate to say it, but I don't know of any others besides me, and I know that can't be true. Like, well, that's actually not true. I take that back. The biggest name that I know of would be Jewel Gomez, author of the Guild of Stories. She kind of opened the door, really, in terms of Black lesbian speculative fiction, and I know of other Black women who write speculative fiction. I'm going to give a shout out to some people a little bit later on. But outside of Jewel Gomez, I don't know for sure if there are any other specifically Black lesbian writers of genre fiction. So, and I don't. Again, I'm not trying to be presumptuous to say, well, it's just me and Jewel Gomez over here. That's not. That's not the case. I'm sure there are others, but I think that part of why it's important for Black lesbian writers of any genre really to have vehicles like Lez Talk Books Radio is because it's not Black lesbian fiction, whether it's horror or literary or sci-fi or contemporary romance or what have you, is very much a kind of a niche within a niche. So it's really important to have, vehicles that can provide some visibility like this one. So I have to say thank you to you both for that, because it's really important to have these kinds of resources.
Absolutely, I agree. And then you mentioned, writers having vehicles to get out there and connect with readers. What's been the most effective vehicle for you to date?
Honestly, I think the most effective vehicle for me has been Facebook by far. I am not very good at self-marketing. Like, I'll just put that out there. I'm really bad at that aspect of being a writer because it's not really something that I necessarily thought I'd have to do, if that makes any sense, but it's really important. So I'm trying to learn a lot. And but I think with Facebook, it's nice because I can get people to check out my work. I have a lot of people that I network with because of all the different roles I occupy. In addition to being a writer, I'm also an educator. So, I get to talk to a lot of different people with a lot of different interests. And so as a result of that and connecting with them on Facebook, I can also say, hey, by the way, did you know I write, and here's my website, and, all that. So Facebook has been really helpful. Twitter also has become really useful. I don't think I maximize my usage of Twitter as well as I could because I'm by nature a very wordy person, and that 160 characters just does not do it for me. So Facebook is better because in that way I could just kind of, I can say everything I have to say, and that way people, who are interested can respond, and we can kind of start up a dialogue. But Facebook definitely, Twitter would come second. I also have a blog that I often neglect, but that also has actually, surprisingly enough, been really good in getting the word out and marketing. So,
I want to go back to what you said about Jill Gomez and speculative fiction, and talk a little bit more about that work. I also think that, like you said, that Black lesbian fiction is a little undervalued. Like it's a genre within a genre, so it's kind of hard, for it to get out of there. But I thought about somebody like Fiona Zeddy, who also does not necessarily speculative fiction. She writes erotica, but she has lots of dark elements in her work too. She writes a lot of vampire type erotica type stories, and so when we think about now how much the vampire sagas have just blown up on some level in popular culture. Jill Gomez was doing this in 1996. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's how do we overlook that? And so people are actually talking about it a little bit more now. And scholars have always, or some scholars, I should say, have taken some interest in it, because of the themes as well as, the fact that it is a vampire novel. But there's no doubt that I think that there are some folks out there who are doing similar work, but who just may not, like you said, have the venues or the resources to get it out there and connect with people. But I do think social media has been, a blessing for all of us in terms of just being able to connect with other Black lesbian writers and publishers and, folks and readers, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
So yeah. I want to ask you something about your story, The Ladies' Room, because I read it a couple of times, and it just kind of creeped me out, Paula. I'm just going to tell you. It did. But in a good way, though, so I just, how did you come up with that idea for this particular story? What is this Ladies' Room about? Where did you get that from?
Well, the story, The Ladies' Room is actually kind of I don't know if it would be considered a companion piece, but it was inspired by a story that I read. I can't remember the name of the collection. It was years ago, like over 10 years ago, probably. I was an undergrad in college. But it was a story that was written by two guys by the name of John Skip and Craig Spector. And the story was called Gentlemen, and it was Skip and Spector are well known in the horror genre, particularly as kind of some of the sort of founding fathers of a subgenre of horror called splatterpunk. And splatterpunk is really, really violent and really gory and very graphic. And so it's an acquired taste. And but as any good writer, you have to read everything. And so I was really impressed by this story that kind of answered the question, and again, this was over 10 years ago, but it kind of presented a very terrifying but interesting answer to the question of why do women, or why do some women seem to be attracted to guys who are just really aggressive and mean and abusive. And it was one of the first stories I've ever read that dealt firsthand with the social issue without being really heavy-handed about it. No pun intended. And so I just kind of carried that idea with me for a really long time, and it actually I remember the exact moment where I got the idea for the ladies' room is I was in a creative writing workshop as an undergrad, and I think class was almost over or something, and one female student got up to go to the restroom, and another female student got up behind her and said, "I'll go with you." And then one of the male students said, "Why do women always go to the bathroom in pairs?" And I think that's the first line of the story, or somewhere, like it's one of the first 5 lines of the story. And I just kind of went from there and kind of thought about, like what is it about, what is it about being a woman, about being female, where there's always this, and again, I know this isn't a universal experience, but I mean, again, there's some level of vulnerability to being a woman, no matter what. I mean, that's, I know people would like to argue with that, but I largely think that they're wrong. But there is some level of vulnerability there, and I thought about, how would you turn that around, and what would that look like? And at the same time, as while I was taking this creative writing class, I was also studying, I was taking some classes in Eastern religions, and I was really fascinated in particular with Taoism and this idea that there is some sort of, universal force that exists in everything. And so it just kind of, those two ideas, just kind of fermented and started to fuse together in some pretty dark ways, and that's a lot of where that story came from.
Awesome. And I guess I'll ask this really quick little follow-up, because my other question was, well, what is the everything? What does that mean? Because I was like, well, everything is her, this woman is crazy, she's pulling her fingernails out with pliers. I mean, that was everything, But outside of that, I was like, well, what does that really mean? So you did touch on that a little bit, but could you give us a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic question. I kind of leave it intentionally vague, because I'm just one of those people, like, just as a reader and as a writer, I like when things are explained, but I don't want them explained too much. And so I kind of wanted that whole idea. I think the final line of the story is, I myself have become everything. And I really liked the sort of sinister ambiguity of that. Like so if you get to the end of the story and you're like, what does that actually mean? Like, that's part of what, that's kind of intentional. I don't know. I think when I originally wrote the story, I had this idea of this sort of secret, vast, like, conspiracy, where, this being, whatever you want to call it, that kind of coexists inside the narrator's mind, or doesn't, she might be making it all up, is something that spreads kind of like a virus. And there's a bit of the story that kind of explains how that process works. So, I mean, it could, initially it was an idea that it would, this sort of virus that transmitted from woman to woman. But it can mean a lot. It can mean a lot more than that. I think it could mean that, I mean, she, like I said, and like you kind of hinted at, she might be completely insane. That might not mean anything. Or exactly, she's not the most reliable narrator.
Right.
So
right.
I think it can mean a lot of things. I know initially it was meant to be sort of this aggressive, misandrist parasite, but the more, just based on my own kind of life experiences and learning, when I do go back and read that story or think about that story, the everything is pretty open-ended. And so I think it's very much left up to interpretation, which I think makes it a little scarier. At least I hope.
I want to ask specifically about your first long-form story, and that is Made in the Hill. Now, you have to tell me, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Probably. I don't know.
It is what it is. Well, I'm going to call it Made in the Hill.
We'll call it that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's right. It's Latin, and I have a thing for Latin. I always have. But, because it's Latin and it's technically a dead language and nobody speaks it anymore, I have no idea if the pronunciation is correct. I watched, some YouTube videos of people speaking in Latin to see, what it sounded like. But, again, they could be wrong. I have no idea. So we'll go with Made in the Hill. That's fine with me.
Okay, yeah, we'll just stick with my southern version of it. But, it's a novella in the larger book, For Ghosts, and I will tell you, it was very interesting because when I first started reading it, I had no idea that I would land on the protagonist, Samira. And so, you open with a couple who, in my opinion, there was no love there, and then you close with a couple where there was a lot of love there, and I just didn't expect to be taken on that journey, so that's one thing I really appreciated. But I want to ask you, as a writer, this being your first long-form story, and I know that you're moving into other, novels or longer projects, what do you prefer? Because I feel like, as a writer, I just feel like with a short story, you kind of get it out there and you're able to move on, and you have, this excitement and relationship with, characters that you can kind of love. But personally, I kind of struggle with, oh, my God, these characters continue to live in your head, and, you have this love relationship with them. But what do you want to gravitate to pretty much in the long run, shorter stories or longer ones?
That is such a great question, Lauren, and I really don't know. The fact that I was able to finish Modern Night Hill was just, for me, such a huge accomplishment, because that's one of my big, issues, like you said, with the short story, you get the characters down, you get the plot down. There's nothing extraneous, or at least there shouldn't be anything extraneous. And so it's a very focused process, and I've been working on a dark fantasy epic, really, that will probably span more than one book. It'll probably end up being a trilogy, again, provided I ever actually write the whole damn thing. But I've been working on that, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I think I first got the idea for it in 2004 or 2005, so it's pushing 10 years, if not 10 years already. And part of it is because with a novel, there's so many different directions you can go, and I think that I like short fiction because it's point A to point B, that's it, Right. Novellas are a nice sort of compromise between the two, and I really finishing the novella was a big deal for me personally, and I have some other novella-length projects in the works. So, as far as which ones do I plan on doing more of, excuse me, I imagine it will probably be more short stories. But I do have, again, I have some, several ideas for novels. But, short stories have always, cheesy as it sounds, short story has always been my first love, and it's, it's the form that I feel most comfortable and confident in is shorter fiction. So
you are featured in Sumiko Salson's free ebook, and yes, I did say free because I want everybody to know it's free.
Right.
And it's titled 60 Black Women in Horror. And I just love that. I actually read the introduction, and she actually published a book with 62 women, and then she goes back on her website and continues to add to this list because, like you said in the beginning, so many of these women we don't know, and even if they are writing similar to you, similar genres, we still need an introduction to them because they bring something to the table that we need. We need their representation. So what was your experience like working with Sumiko to compile that and what you learned from her efforts as well?
That's a fantastic question. I cannot sing Sumiko's praises enough because she is just a total, badass, independent writer. She just had an idea because she saw this absence of anything, kind of collecting, like you were saying, profiles of Black women horror writers. And, instead of, sitting around thinking about it and, trying to, figure out some way to get, someone else to do it, she just did it. And that's, one of the things that kind of indirectly I've kind of, been really inspired by is just that very kind of maverick attitude, this isn't here, it needs to be here, so boom, I'm going to do it. And so that has been really, really fantastic. And when she contacted me to be included in 60 Black Women in Horror Writing, floored. First of all, because I didn't know that there were 59 other Black women in horror writing. I knew there were others, but I was just are there that many for real? Where? I don't. So a lot of it was just, it was very much a very eye-opening and affirming and empowering experience. There were a few, Black women horror writers who, excuse me, I was familiar with, like Jewel Gomez and Octavia Butler, primarily, kind of classified as science fiction, but certainly her work, like Kindred and, what is it? Her Blood in the title. Bloodchild has, very much, it's a vampire tale, and so she also, treads kind of the sort of darker edges of science fiction. I was familiar with Jemiah Jefferson, the author of Wounds, another vampire novel, and she has some comic books and graphic novels under her belt. Who else? Linda D. Addison, I think the first Black woman to win a Bram Stoker Award, which is a really big deal. And so I knew that there were other Black women writers writing speculative fiction, but I didn't know there were that many Black women specifically writing works that were part of the horror genre. So I learned a lot just from being included in that as well. And just seeing the process of the response that Sumiko has gotten from, readers of the work has just been a very, at least for me, again, it's kind of like secondhand to it. It's just been really cool to see people, be so excited because, again, like we've, been discussing this entire conversation that, there's just not very many venues out there that showcase Black women writing at all in any genre, but particularly when it comes to speculative fiction and horror fiction in particular. So that's been a lot of what I've gotten out of that process.
Yeah, right, and that's great. And I absolutely love the cover. The fact that she, just compiles everybody on the, cover, just kind of throws in your face that there's no look to this genre. There's no look to writing dark fiction and everything. We come in all shapes, forms, and sizes, and, this is what we do there. We bring diversity to the table. But do people make assumptions about, you, Paula, you're a complex woman versus being this, a writer who's writing this dark fiction? Do people make assumptions about who you are or who you should be?
Absolutely. I think I've never gone to a reading where I was presenting something to an audience where people have always, where somebody has, somebody always asks the question, well, why do you write such dark fiction? Why? Or I'll tell somebody like I am a writer, and this doesn't happen so much now, but when I first started, people would always say, oh, do you write romance? And I'm like, no, not at all. No offense to people who write romance. Romance is cool, don't get me wrong. But that's just not what I write. So there's, again, it's that, if you're female, then the assumption is that you write romance. And then as a Black woman, I've gotten kind of pigeonholed sometimes, or people want to ask if I write like urban fiction or like urban like romance, which again, nothing wrong with that, but that's just not the genre I'm familiar with. That's not the genre that I work in. So yeah, pigeonholing happens, but it used to bother me, but at this, again, after having some experience under my belt, it's a good opportunity to tell people, like, actually, no, I write primarily, dark fiction. I consider myself a horror writer, and, kind of taking the conversation from there. I think it's a good opportunity when people ask those types of questions to, like you were saying, to kind of emphasize the diversity in the horror genre overall and speculative fiction overall. Like you were saying, we look different. We write about different things. Our voices are different. Our purpose are often different. So it's a good opportunity to ask those questions when the pigeonholing inevitably happens. So.
Awesome. Well, before we go, I'd like for you to tell our listeners where they can find your work, what you're working on next. Plug yourself in the next minute. All the plugging you can stand, so that people who don't know where your work is and who you are and what you're working on right now, what they can go ahead and pick up. They can get a copy of your work.
Sure. Absolutely. There are a couple places you could get my work. The main place is through Amazon.com. I have an author's page because most of my work is in anthologies, so it's collected with other fantastic work from other fantastic writers. It's available through Kindle. It's also available in paperback. So the Amazon is like the first place I would go. Just, go to Amazon.com, do a search for Paula D. Ashe, and then you'll find all sorts of stuff. Also, I have a website that I neglect, but it's www.pauladashe.com. I'm also on Twitter, so it's just twitter.com/Paula D. Ashe. I'm also on Facebook. So I've actually had, as I said, I also am an educator, I also teach. I've had students who, before they get to my classes, like, they'll do a Google search for me, and, like, on the first day, they'll just be out of nowhere, like, so you write books? And I'm like, I don't know your name. How did you know that? So apparently the information is out there, but that's the best way to get an idea of what I'm working on and or what I've published. And what's available now. In terms of future projects, I have a short story called All the Hellish Cruelties of Heaven, which is going to be released in a collection called Axes of Evil 2. And it's a collection of heavy metal influenced horror. And I think that'll be out either in November or December, but I'll keep people posted through all the standard social media networks. I'm working on a handful of short stories and another novella called Transubstantiation Blues, which will be kind of a erotic horror police procedural thriller. So lots of hyphens will be required on that one, but I think it'll be fun.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paula, for talking with us tonight. And we want to wish all of our guests and listeners a wonderful week, and to not to forget to talk back through social media and to spread the word. Tell a friend about Lez Talk Books Radio and join the conversation with Latoya Hankin next week. And we want to wish you all a good night.